Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Dad. This is episode 2. I'm Bobtheorc, your host, and today we are going to be talking about Philmont. And I've got my dad here who's been to Philmont perhaps certainly more times than I know of anyone else alive. Here is Dad. Dad, tell us about Philmont.
Probably the way to start is to talk about how it came into being, and even before that, how scouting came into being. And it goes back into the late 1800s. South Africa, ships would go around the tip of South Africa. And the Dutch originally wanted a place to grow vegetables and provision their ships. And later England, as a maritime power, naval power, fought and took over South Africa. Well, there are a lot of Dutch settlers there originally from Holland, and they weren't particularly happy about having the English take over the area. But England was a naval power, much more dominant than Holland, and took over the area. Now, a British officer came from an upper-class family, but it was penniless. I think the father had passed away, and the mother was raising a number of children. And the only way upward for this young man was to go into the military. And he served as an officer in India, and then later went to Africa, South Africa. And that's a country at the southernmost tip of Africa. And a war broke out between the settlers who spoke Dutch, called Afrikaners, and they spoke a language called Afrikaans, and the British. And he was supposed to defend a hopeless situation against overwhelming numbers of those very, very upset Dutch Afrikaners. And he purposely managed to misconstrue his instructions. He was told to locate at a certain location, which to him made no sense. So he purposely managed to misunderstand the instructions, and he located a little village of about 2,000 people, but it was a rail juncture that some important rail lines went through there, and had a workshop for the trains, foundry, and could cast things and make parts for the old steam locomotives. So he had the hopeless task of defending against not 3-to-1 odds or 5-to-1, probably overwhelming odds. But he, through guile and cunning and intelligence, he was able to make the enemy think he was much more strong in defense than he really was. And he used the boys in the town to go out and scout. They pretended they were playing, and they'd throw a ball or do whatever they'd do, and they'd kind of get close to the enemy lines, but the enemy thought these are just kids, they're harmless. But they would bring back information about where the enemy was located and how strong their fortification was and this sort of thing. And he used the foundry to make a cannon or a couple cannons. He had a carbide lantern. You'd put, I think it's calcium carbide or some kind of carbide in water. It emits a gas. Miners' lamps would use this. He had a spotlight. The spotlight on the front of the train would be like this. And he made the enemy think at night that he had all these spotlights, that if they were to attack him at night, he could turn on the spotlight and beam it at them. What he had was only one train headlamp, I think, and he'd take it around to various locations around the beleaguered town, and he'd beam it out from one location, then he'd black it out, and then to another location, and so forth. So they thought if we were to charge, they would light us up and shoot at us. And then he had these wooden boxes made in the foundry and the workshop for the train, and theoretically they were filled with explosives. Well, he took one out, made a big show so the enemy could see that they were going out bearing these big boxes, and he had a dynamite plunger. He pushed this thing down and gave an electrical charge, and kablooey, the thing blew up. So the enemy thought that, wow, this whole area is mined all the way around. Well, indeed, he didn't have that much powder. He just buried dirt. So he had these boxes of dirt that he made a big deal of burying all around the town, so the enemy didn't attack him. And then he had the guts to go out. He had this train backing backwards along the railroad tracks with a flat car on it with sandbags, and he went out and he attacked the enemy. They thought, this guy must really have strong fortifications and armaments and people for him to be attacking us, that the train went backwards, that steam locomotive, chug, 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 and it was going backwards with the rail car, and, he was shooting from that and harassing the enemy. Well, people in Great Britain were worried about losing the colony of South Africa, and from time to time he'd have a native runner, go through the enemy lines. And in London, the newspapers made a big deal. Of course, they wanted to sell the newspapers. They made a big deal out of the fact that Battle of Mafeking, being besieged 28 days. Battle of Mafeking, besieged 120 days. Battle of Mafeking. So I don't know how many days it was, 160, 180 days. But by the time the British forces came and relieved the siege, and he returned to London. He was a hero. It was like the end of World War II. He had never, in those days, you couldn't have married, and officers couldn't marry and have their wives and kids, with housing and so on. In those days, he'd never had a chance to marry. So he was older, in his 30s or 40s. And when he went back to London, he had the choice of any woman he would have wanted, young, attractive women. And he married, I guess, a wonderful woman. And she started something later based on what he did called the Girl Guides. But he had written a book. He was a smart man. He'd written a book about scouting. Scouts in the military go behind enemy lines. They scout out where the river crossings are, where the enemy fortifications are, and so forth. And in fact, as he'd go around scouting, he had a sketchbook. He was disguised as a daffy Englishman who'd been out in the sun too much. And he went around and he would draw butterflies, and hidden in the lines of the wings were the fortifications that they didn't realize. Anyway, he went to London. He took a book he'd written called Scouting for the military and called it Scouting for Boys. And he took some boys to Brownsea Island, and he found that the outdoors was a wonderful training ground for young people. You can fool mom or dad. You don't pick up your socks or underwear off the floor, but you can't fool Mother Nature. If you forget your raincoat and it's going to rain on you, you're going to get wet. You learn in a hurry when you're dealing with Mother Nature. You better be prepared and do what you better do. Of course, there's a saying, so many city people aren't used to bad weather. There's no such thing as bad weather, just poor clothing choices. So you want to take along good clothing. Anyway, it worked so successfully that in 1907 he started Boy Scouting, which has gone all over the world. So in 1907 it started in England. In the year 1910, 3 years later, an American was over in London. And in those days, London was heavily industrialized, and there was smog and fog. And this guy was lost looking for a certain location somewhere, in the winding streets of London. And a young man came up to him and said, "Sir, may I help you find where you're going?" And he said, "Certainly." And the boy took him wherever it was. And the man offered him, "Would you like a shilling?" or whatever amount of money he offered him. And the young man said, "No, I'm a Boy Scout. We do a good turn every day." The man was so impressed that he came back to the United States and started scouting in the United States in 1910. Well, it grew and flourished. My father, who was born in 1905, was a Boy Scout at probably age 13, 14 years old.
So he would have been one of the first generations of Boy Scouts.
Yeah, and in those days, Eagle Scout hadn't really much been invented or hadn't been done much, but they had my father was part of a Boy Scout band, believe it or not. So I don't recall which instrument he played, but there was a picture of my father in a Boy Scout band. Nonetheless, when it was time for me to be old enough to be a Cub Scout, the beginning level of scouting, I didn't realize I had a choice. I was just enrolled in the Cub Scouts. And so I was in the Cub Scout group, and then later emerged into the Boy Scouts. And I didn't realize that I had a choice. I thought everybody did this. And most of the young men in my class in school were Scouts. And so not knowing any better, I earned the God and Country Award and the Eagle Scout Award, and then a couple of Eagle Scout palms, bronze and gold palms. So anyway, I had the opportunity to go to a place called Philmont Scout Ranch in 1958 and 1959 as a camper. And I had what today we would call work boots. You see guys at the filling station or the people in the ghetto wearing these flat-soled shoes with no arch in them, and they're tan color, and they look kind of nifty. The guys now, don't tie the laces. They just slip them on like slippers. They are the most miserable boots to hike in. I didn't know that real hiking boots existed. Maybe they didn't much in those days. I had blisters and sore feet like you wouldn't believe, and I had the most wonderful time. You learn to be happy while you're miserable. So I hiked Philmont as a camper. And the background on Philmont, how did it come to be? Just as we have wealthy people today like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and the different people that made a lot of money, back in the early 1900s, a man named Waite, W-A-I-T, Phillips, grew up on a farm. He had a twin brother who died from an appendix having burst. He went out to the west. He was in the Tulsa oil fields, and he very wisely bought up some oil properties, and he made a fortune, not a fortune, but an amazing fortune in oil. So at the time, he was one of the wealthiest people. He associated with presidents of the United States. He had a man flying him around in an airplane and so forth, which was unusual in the 1930s. And he built a wonderful mansion in Tulsa, Oklahoma, modeled after some of the Italian villas in Italy. And he bought a whole lot of land out in north central New Mexico. It must have been, I don't know, hundreds of square miles of land. Part of it he gave to the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts eventually received measures about 20 miles north and south, 10 miles east and west, and his name was Phillips. There used to be a Phillips Petroleum Company. He was one of the Phillips brothers, and actually Phillips Petroleum was not his property, it was his brother's property, who was also in the oil business. And Phillips had a property called the Waite Phillips Company, and he very wisely sold out just as the economy crashed in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So here he was sitting on all this money when the economy crashed, housing prices crashed, land prices crashed, and he went out in the 1930s and bought this enormous property that had been a Spanish land grant. So he had this enormous property, and as he owned it, and he sent an architect to Italy, and they studied and found a villa or something. He said, build me one of those things. So they built him a wonderful villa, which now is called by the Boy Scouts the Big House, and it is a super big mansion. In the shower stall, for instance, which was an innovation for the day, he has like 6 or 8 or 10 shower heads that spray you with water from every direction. The bedroom window looks toward one of the mountains. It's a big circular window, and the rock it looks at is called Window Rock, kind of a Window Rock mountain. Anyway, in the late 1930s, as he was growing older, and he was a very kind, generous, wise man, he let the Boy Scouts camp on his property, and he saw that the boys had very, very good qualities. You know, they didn't litter the land, they picked up, they left it nicer than they found it. Wonderful, wonderful qualities. And what scouting has found is that people learn amazingly well by using the outdoors. Scouting is the most wonderful hidden secret. At my father's generation and even my generation, an awful lot of young men were in it. And now it's kind of a secret. People are busy having their son take tuba lessons or violin lessons or cello lessons or soccer or whatever, like you're going to be a tuba player for the rest of your life. Learning the skills in scouting like leadership, self-reliance, how to improvise, I think, to me, are very important skills that you learn in scouting. And thankfully, land has been given, just like the land that Wade Phillips gave, called Philmont, named after him, Philmont, Phillips and Mountain, Philmont. You've got all these camps that were given over the years that, you know, you might pay for a summer program for your son or daughter to go off to a given thing and spend a fortune for it, or go to one of these that was donated with the facilities and, you know, funding to make the thing a lot cheaper. Now, in the early days, scouting was only for boys, and in recent years, as we've gotten more gender parity and so forth, girls are now in scouting. Girls can be at Cub Scouts in the same so-called Cub pack. A pack could be 20, 30, 50 people, and it has what they call a den, which is a group of 8 or 10 or 12 people. So the girls can have, within a given pack can have girls' den or a couple of girls' dens, and the boys can have boys' dens. And they learn crafts and skills and pinewood derby and things like that. And they evolve into Boy Scouts. And at the older level, for whatever reason, they've decided to have all boys troops and all girls troops separately from each other, which are, they can be by the same sponsoring institution, like a Kiwanis Club or Lions Club or church or whatever. And then they have venture crews that can be boys and girls a little bit older, 14 through 20, almost 21. Regular scouting stops at age 18, from about age 10 or 11 up to 18.
Are those venture crews the Explorer Scouts, or is that from my time?
They used to call them Explorer Scouts. Now they call it venture scouting. And sometimes they have what they call a ship. That means they learn to sail and do nautical things. Sometimes I think they have aircraft orientation, different specialties. They have police orientations or emergency EMT orientations. So scouting does a wonderful thing in terms of what it teaches. One of our kids in the troop, I was scoutmaster, first just an interested father, and then a scoutmaster. Now I'm chairman of the parents committee in a troop. And one of our kids was rushing to school one day, and he had an old beat-up backpack, out of kind of canvas, is about to give up and fall apart. And he was rushing along, and all the heavy school books just rip, and it just spilled out of the backpack. So without thinking, he put the backpack down, he took a big pen, took off the cap, poked a bunch of holes in it, took his shoelace, laced the backpack back up, the book bag back up, put his books back in, and ran off to school. That's called improvising. A lot of people are clueless when they get hit with an unusual situation. I've seen just so many things happen like that where they solve a problem. You're backpacking in the wilderness, something breaks, you might stitch it up with, if you don't have the right thread, you might use dental floss. You find a way to make things work. Anyway, back to Philmont and scouting. Wade Phillips had a lot of money. He had all this land. The part that wasn't particularly usable for grazing, cattle grazing, he had a big cattle ranch, and he let the scouts try the northern part of it. He called it Phil Turn, like Philmont or like Phillips, and do a good turn. And the kids took such good care of it, they gave them more of it. And scouting said, we can't accept that. We just have no way to support it. The funding, keeping up the buildings, all the different things we do, the program. Said, that's all right. I'll give you a skyscraper, and the income from the skyscraper can go for it. Where do I just turn that off? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, you just turned off the Zoom.
Oh, okay. There we go. Am I back up here?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, I have an alarm. Okay, so anyway, where were we?
They gave him a skyscraper.
Okay, gave him a skyscraper. His name was Phillips, so naturally it was named the Phil Tower Building. It was a tower, and it was named after Phillips, and he had an office at one of the top floors, and it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that was the town that had one of his various mansions in. So he gave him the Phil Tower Building. And so scouting had the income from the Phil Tower Building to pay for the ranch. Many, many, many years later, scouting decided to sell the building and just invest the proceeds and use the proceeds to pay for the camp. But anyway, it worked out that way. Now, about the camp, you've got approximately 130, 140,000 acres. That is 1,000 with a T, 1,000 acres. In other words, you could walk all day to go from one end to the other. The staff members sometimes, as a competition, have a race more or less. They take light backpacks, lightweight shoes instead of hiking shoes. They'll use trail running shoes, and they see how fast they can go from one end of the ranch to the others. Now, these are fit young college types, and they just knock themselves nuts trying to make it from one end. I think whatever the timing and distance is, but they have a good time doing it. Well, nonetheless, I went there as a camper, as a kid, probably around 14, 15 years old, and it was a hard experience, but it was such an amazing, wonderful experience, unlike anything else you get in life, that then when I was in college, after I think it was my freshman and sophomore years, so in 1961 and 1962, in the summers, I worked on the staff. And I'd worked in a training program that trained kids about outdoor skills and activities. It was called Junior Leader Training. Anyway, a number of years passed, and I was busy, having a life and raising kids. And then you came along, and when you were old enough to start scouting, you didn't know you had a choice.
No, I sure didn't.
So you started out in scouting, and you didn't even know you had a choice on Eagle Scout, just like I didn't know I had a choice on Eagle Scout. In fact, your brother came along 5 years after you, and he was in the kitchen one day talking to your mom and me, and he'd almost finished his Eagle Scout project. He said, I didn't realize I had a choice on Eagle Scout. Yeah. Anyway, and you both turned out to be fine young men. So anyway, you came up to scouting, went to local camps and so forth. And in the year 1990, Greater New York Councils was looking for people that had some vague idea of what Philmont was about. And I'd actually been there the 4 summers, 2 as a camper, 2 on the staff. So we were interviewed as possible leaders, and I made the cut as being a leader. The guy I tied in with was an Eagle Scout, but he'd really never gotten his feet very dirty. Well, he was a wonderful organizer and a wonderful people person, and I was a good outdoors person. So the 2 of us teamed up, and we took a crew. There were 4 crews, I think, that went the first summer. And I think an insurance company, back when things were more prosperous, an insurance company gave them enough money. Was that the year that we took the bus all the way out to New Mexico from New York City? So anyway, we hiked Philmont, and so I hiked every successive year since then. So counting the 4 summers, 2 as a camper, 2 as a staffer, and the various summers, I have done 37 summers at Philmont.
And didn't you? There were a couple summers you went twice, because you went with the New York group, and then you also went with the Tulsa group.
Right. Your cousin, Kevin, my godson, who earned Eagle Scout there, he didn't know any better either, so he earned Eagle Scout. So I went 4 times with the Tulsa group. So in those summers, I'd double dip. They went early summer, and the New York group went late summer. So by the time I went to the health checkup and showed them my physical, they'd say, "Oh, you were here earlier in the summer. Okay, you passed. You were fine." That worked out well enough. Um, I grew up as a kid in rural Kansas with some farmland. We had about 400 plus acres of farmland, and some of it was rough timberland. And building log cabins or trying to build a log cabin and crossing streams on walking across a log and all that was part of my life growing up. My father wasn't a big trapper, but I remember once helping him with traps, and he trapped a muskrat. I don't know what else he trapped. We'd go hunting. We'd hunt small game like rabbits and squirrels. So I had an outdoor background. Anyway, the wonderful thing at Philmont is that you watch these kids. I mentor these kids, and they just grow and develop and become amazing people. And the best thing about it is you learn to be uncomfortable and not mind it. And you get in a finicky, fancy, hoity-toity city like New York, and you have these people sitting in a restaurant. "Oh, this soup is a little bit too cold," or this is a little too salty. "Oh, end of the world, send it back. I'm never, ever, ever going to come here again. Heaven forbid. Oh, and it's a little bit cold outside. My wrap isn't warm enough, and life is so miserably tough. Oh, I don't know if I can deal with it." And you get out there and you get a hailstorm. I remember your brother or you were holding a backpack on top of your head so the hailstorm wouldn't hit your head up on Mount Phillips.
Well, I can tell
you learned it. Was that you or your brother?
Yeah, no, that was. But I can tell you the story if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So what happened was, no, we got caught in the hailstorm, and I think that was the year that I was carrying the damn watermelon up the mountain, and so my backpack was really heavy. And Paul was at the front of the line. I was towards the back because you had us kind of keeping the kids between us so that we wouldn't run into any problems. So nobody, there wouldn't be any stragglers. And so we'd take.
It's called a sandwich. You have the guy at the front called a point, like the point of a spear, and the guy at the back is called a sweep, like a broom sweeping up behind. You don't want anybody to fall behind the sweep or get ahead of the point.
So anyway, so it started hailing. And I was caught out in the open, and my backpack was so big that I just ducked down underneath it and used it as a bit of a shelter. And I had a rigid. I think I had my rigid hat that year. One of my adventuring hats. And
show us.
Yeah, this is not the hat that I was wearing that year. This is the hat that I had after that, because the hat in the hailstorm got all beat to hell. And then Mom brought this hat back from Sydney, Australia, when she's singing there. But anyway, so Paul had taken shelter under a tree. There was and nobody knew where he was. So you guys sent me off to find him. So Paul had found this. They have these little scrubby pine trees because you're up practically above the tree line. You don't really get big trees. And Paul had found this little scrubby pine tree that was really thick but short and had kind of a break in the foliage, and he had wedged himself in there and wedged the backpack shut, to cover the opening, and I found him, so I wedged in there, and then we had our backpacks blocking the opening, so we'd have some shelter, and we rode out the storm in there, and we were actually pretty comfortable. That was a good tree. I think you guys probably took it worse than we did.
I think comfort is a relative sort of thing anyway.
Well, I mean, it was that year I had my Gore-Tex jacket. I actually have the jacket on the back of the chair. It's my old Philmont jacket. My old North Face jacket. I've been wearing this thing for forever. I actually have some.
Hey, what? Go ahead and finish that. I want to bring something up here.
I have some surprises to show you whenever you're ready.
Show us your surprises that are left over from when you're. Yeah. How many times do you hike Philmont altogether?
Oh, I have no idea. A lot.
Yeah.
4, 5, 6. I don't know.
Something like that. I'd have to look it up. Yeah.
So first off, every year, my first year at Philmont, I wanted a hiking stick because I thought it would be cool. And EMS had these hiking sticks. And this one looked super cool and super badass, so I decided to get it. And then the bottom tread on it, oops, I bumped the background. Let's set that up again. Anyway, this had a really crappy tread on the bottom, so I replaced it with one from a medical crutch. It'd keep better. And so this was my first hiking stick at Philmont. And as cool as this looked, this is a lousy hiking stick. It sucked. But I liked it anyway. I kept it. And for the first few years, you would just go and find a stick and shave it down and then toss it afterwards. And on one of the trips, you made this hiking stick, and on it's dated 1995.
Trans World Airlines. That's a TWA.
Yeah.
How long has TWA been out of business?
A while. And so so I kept the stick and flew it home with us. They let us take the stick. This is from when you went with Jerry's troop with Troop 1 in July of 1995. And
wow.
so I saved this one for you. And this was apparently not a great stick either. And so you had decided to get a better walking stick. And we got better walking sticks at EMS. And so you got this one, which was, you put a little Eagle Scout logo on it. And I don't remember what year you got this. Let's see if there's a date on here. No, there's not. But so this one was your hiking stick. And then I got a similar one that was just a little bit shorter because I was a kid and I was a lot shorter then. And actually, I never really got that much taller. I still like the stick. And so this one was mine. This one was yours. And so I saved these. Somehow they I guess they ended up in Tulsa. Well, mine I took with me to college because I'd busted up my knee, and so I was needing my walking stick to help me walk. So I've whenever I go anywhere, I always slide it into the car just in case I hurt myself. Whenever I go hiking or camping, just so I have a backup. But those
point of information: 1990 was 30 years ago. And we hiked in the early 1990s with you there. Now they tend to use trekking poles. We have these lightweight poles, one in each hand, and they tend to work pretty well. Some people use these hiking sticks in the same fashion as some use trekking poles. What do you have back behind you there? I see. Is it some hiking boots?
Yeah. So I've got some of my old hiking boots, and so my first year at Philmont, we had these Timberland, work boots, basically, hiking boots. We didn't know any better at the time, and they were terrible. I mean, they're good work boots, but oh my goodness, it was miserable. And
Timberland may make better boots now, but
right, but they certainly weren't good for hiking. And so what happened was, there was a, and so we got better boots the next go round. And when I was going off to college, there were these really nice, I think there's like a Swiss mountaineering boots. I don't remember what.
Swiss or Italian? What's the brand?
Scarpa.
Scarpa.
Yeah, Scarpa.
Anyway. I think that's Italian. And by the way, they need some wax on them, some beeswax.
Oh, I don't wear these anymore. These things are super beat up. Anyway, so what had happened was, they were, I guess they had a closeout sale at EMS, and they were discontinuing this line. And I loved this boot. I had a pair that I liked, and they were closing them out. So I got two more pairs that I brought to college, and I just wore these things just constantly. The treads are actually still in pretty good shape. I've got this pair and another pair that's even more beat up, and I wore these all through college. Let's see here. Here's my old.
You can wear them in rainstorms and snow and everything else.
Well, and
and those are. Go ahead.
Well, what I liked about them is they had a steel shank along the bottom, so if you're stepping on rough terrain, your foot doesn't bend and you don't feel the jabs. It's just a really solid sole for really rough terrains because It's got that piece of metal in there. And then here's my old sleeping bag that I take along, and this was not a particularly warm sleeping bag, but it was light for the time, and I found that if I on a cold night I would just wear my jacket and wear my pants and just a bunch of
extra layers,
right, just to save on the weight, And there's one night on top of Mount Phillips where it was snowed in the middle of the night. It was just freezing cold. I ended up sleeping wearing all the clothes that I had brought, plus the sleeping bag, and I was still cold. And I woke up with a collapsed tent buried in the snow. So,
Mount Phillips, I believe, is about 2 miles above sea level. I think around 11,000 feet.
Yeah, 11. Yeah, something like that. I could look it up. But yeah, it's
the base camp is about 1.25 miles. Philmont main headquarters base camp is about 1.25 miles above sea level.
So anyway, and so that's some of the memorabilia that I found when you said you wanted to record a video talking about Philmont. I actually wore this hat. This has been sort of my adventuring hat. I've worn this for years. This hat's been all over the world, and it's all beat to hell, and it's been a really good hat. So anyway, that's my memory.
Let me go into a little bit
for you.
Part of the thing, there's a thing that around the dinner bell, while people are gathering for a meal, lunch or supper, the Philmont Rangers, the staff members who take people in the backcountry, the first 2 or 3 days, if you're coming from a location where maybe you've done prep hikes, but you're not too sure about mountainous terrain and so forth, they send a ranger out with you for the first 2 or 3 days just to teach you all the techniques, how to purify water out of a stream and things like that. And at mealtime, they get together and there's kind of a stone raised area with an old bell from a Santa Fe train. And they stand on top of it and do a thing, kind of a truss thing where they're facing in 4 different directions. They fall backward, truss thing where they're being caught. But they do something called the Philmont Chant. And after the first few words, it gets mumbled and people don't really catch what it is. But this is approximately what the Philmont Chant is. And it tells a lot about, what the qualities that you develop going to Philmont. I want to go back to Philmont, where the old Rayado flows. That's the Rayado River. Where the rain comes a-seepin', in the tent where you're a-sleepin', and the waters say, hello. To wake up in the morning with my socks all wringing wet brings back fondest memories, and outdoorsman can't forget. To hike once more the canyon floor, from Indian writings to old camp, my backpack a-creakin', my back with sweat a-reekin', and my legs beginning to cramp. To hike again with such great men as made those famous treks from Beaubien to Porky, and from Cito to Carmax. Anyway, that's the Philmont Chant. And I found an old letter from a man who'd gone to Philmont in the early 90s with his son. Do you remember Dennis Reef?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it was Dylan's dad.
Yeah. So he'd written a letter, and here's approximately is what he said. He'd written this about the year 2000, 1999 or 2000. And he's talking about Philmont. He's talking about, can you imagine, carrying 60 pounds, you try to carry less than that now if you can, more like 40, 45, but carrying 60 pounds of heavy camping equipment in the hot sun, drinking iodine-flavored coffee, wearing the same stinking clothes every day, eating squeezed cheese and food that my cat would turn away from, sleeping on the hard, cold, uneven ground, fighting back altitude sickness, climbing a mountain until my lungs are about to burst, and loving every minute of it. And that pretty well describes it. You're uncomfortable, but it's so beautiful, and you're having a wonderful time. The camaraderie, the teamwork, everything, it's kind of like the Communist Manifesto, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, that everybody pitches in on a small group. It works. When you have a family or a team of people, it's a real joy to function in that fashion. Anyway, he says, it was my privilege to be with his son, 2 trips. Got to be with some really fine young scouts. These men are the future of our country, and the country will be in good hands. Just side note here, the original astronauts that went to the moon were, I think, almost all Eagle Scouts in background. And some of the training they did to prepare for the moon rocks and all that, they went to the mountains of Philmont and did some of their practice. He said, I also remember getting to know my boyhood friend. There was another father and his son. Let's see.
Yeah, I remember that, but I don't remember the other guy's name.
Remember Walter Rock?
Yeah.
Masterson.
Was that?
Anyway,
was that, okay.
As I look at the Philmont map, memories come flooding back to me. Learning to navigate by compass, shooting black powder rifles, how to set up camp, how to treat water, how to pack, throwing tomahawks, carrying water for the dry camps, a hailstorm on Mount Phillips, snow on the top of Mount Phillips. The views at Schaefer's Pass, outrunning a thunderstorm on Tooth Ridge, crisscrossing a stream 23 times. I think that's the stream to Black Mountain that you cross somewhere around 45 to 50 times on the way to Black Mountain Camp. Telling stories at night, singing around campfires, riding horses, smelling the ponderosa pine trees, climbing the Tooth of Time. A boy getting stuck on top of Mountain Ridge. Now it's known as that boy's rock, such and such rock. Eating in the mess hall at base camp, the town of Cimarron, New Mexico. All the wonderful memories. There were places with names like Lover's Leap, Crater Lake, Beaubien, Phillips Junction, Wild Horse, Mount Phillips, Cimarroncito, Ute Gulch, Clark's Fork, Schaefer's Pass, Tooth Ridge. Each place has its own special memories. Clear and copious is the expression we learned after drinking as much water as possible to fight off altitude sickness and keep from dehydrating in the hot sun. We all know what it means. I'll never forget it. Let's see here. We did some things in Colorado Springs at something called the Flying W Ranch. We had some country singers. Went up Pikes Peak, the Cog Railway. And afterwards, the leaders went into the St. James Hotel. It's a historic old hotel with an ornamental tin roof, or tin, the ceiling was made out of this ornamental pattern tin put up there. It has bullet holes, 20, 30, 40 bullet holes. The old cowboys back in the days of Masterson and all these people would ride their horses in there. They get all liquored up, ride their horses in and shoot up the ceiling. Anyway, he remembers that we'd go in there and have a steak dinner after camping out. So anyway, I don't know quite what people are going to think about this. They'll think we're crazy for living outdoors, but it's a wonderful growth experience, and I've done it as an older person. It's a motivation to prepare for it. I live in an apartment building here in New York with 33 actual floors. It's called a 35-floor building, but 13th floor doesn't exist, and the ground floor doesn't really count. So if I go up and down those stairs, I take the elevator down, but I climb the stairs. That's good preparation for climbing the mountains. So, and I try to do as much walking as I can, running errands around here in New York City. Any thoughts or questions? What comes to your mind?
So I remember that. So I hate iodine water, and so what I would do is, since I had a really big backpack, I would always, most people carry 2 quarts of water with them, and I'd carry 8 quarts because I didn't want to drink the iodine water.
That's 16 pounds of water. A quart weighs 2 pounds. Wow.
Yeah, but I was in wrestling. I didn't care. So
you were a wrestler in high school, yeah.
So and then judo in college, and so I would usually carry like 8 quarts of water, and whenever we got to one of the staff camps that had purified water, I'd wash everything out, refill, and that way whenever we
every second or third day,
and so whenever we went to a dry camp, I'd have enough water to get me through the dry camps and things like that. And I remember the year that we carried the watermelon. I had all that other stuff, and I had because I didn't really like the Philmont food. We had stockpiled on the bus ride out. I'd gotten a bunch of beef jerky. And I'd always bring along a bunch of like real food along that was heavier but tasty, and so I'd usually have an extra 15, 20 pounds of crap in my bag, but I'd skimp on some of the other stuff to compensate for the weight.
Well, it helped that you were a pretty strong wrestler in those days.
And it was but anyway, so the Rangers, whenever not my first time. The first time I did everything the way they were supposed to, and I just didn't enjoy it as much at all. And after that, I was like, screw it, I'm going to be luxurious, because I started, getting a lot bigger. And so I remember when we were that summer that I brought all the extra stuff along, and Paul brought all the extra stuff along. When I'd be hanging up the backpack to weigh, because they wanted to weigh the backpack, and if it was more than 60 pounds, they'd bitch about it. And my backpack weighed like 100 pounds. So when I'd be hanging up my backpack, Paul would be behind it, kind of lifting it up. so it wouldn't look like it weighed that much. So the ranger wouldn't give us a hard time when Paul hung up his backpack. I'd lift it up from behind so that because we brought sodas along and we brought.
They had a meat scale that you could weigh your backpack before you head out.
And I didn't actually carry the watermelon the entire trek. What I did was I had talked to some of the staff members, and they helped me pre-stage a bunch of stuff, because otherwise the backpack would have weighed 150 pounds. I couldn't have carried that.
We try now as much as we can to get the weight down to half that.
Yeah, so we they helped me pre-stage the watermelon and the powdered donuts and the instant pizza the pizza stuff and all the you
got the watermelon at Phillips Junction, I think.
Yeah. And so Paul and I snuck off and we got the it wasn't a very big watermelon. It was a small one. It was probably only a 10 or 15 pound watermelon, and we filled put it in there, and people were wondering why my backpack was so heavy, because going up Mount Phillips, not only to have the watermelon, but I was also helping carry some of the crew water. So I had one of those gallon dromedaries. So there's another 8 pounds, stuck in my backpack as well, and I was really worried.
What's your fondest memory? What's your fondest memory?
Well, my fondest memory was it's two. So the first one was when we got to the top of the mountain, we figured out that if we ate the watermelon, we'd have to carry out the trash, because you can't, we're not going to go litter, and I didn't want to carry a messy leftover watermelon. And so there's this crew passing by, and they still had a ways to go, and they saw the watermelon.
They were also oxygen deprived, from just getting up there. Your brain doesn't have much calculating power.
And so they were all amazed that that I had a watermelon, and so I said to them, "Man, you guys want our last watermelon? We just can't eat anymore." And so they were like, "Sure." And so they took the watermelon and they carried the watermelon out for me.
They were off to the next mountain.
Right. And by the
Comanche Peak.
Right.
Comanche Peak camp.
And by the time we got back to base camp, because they had gotten back a day before us, so when we got back, the rumor had spread around that I didn't carry one watermelon; I carried like 4, and so it was, which I don't think I could have carried 4 watermelons up that damn mountain. So that was one of my fondest memories. Just these kids being so happy.
What's your second good memory? What else?
All right, we are back with Dad. We had a little internet technical snafu, and I can see you, Dad. Dad, can you see me again?
Here I am.
All right, I think we're all connected up. So you were about to ask me about my fondest memories of Philmont, and I really enjoyed hiding under that tree with my brother. But what I liked the best, there's this year where the staff camps have all these activities, and once you do it, it's not that big of a deal. And I really just wanted to enjoy my trek, take it easy. I brought along a sketchbook. I had my my wonderful hat with me, and I just prop up on a rock while everybody else is trying to do rock climbing or branding their boots or whatever. I'd prop up on a rock, put the hat over my head, take a nap, or I'd pull out my sketchbook and I'd just draw and take notes and things like that, write down ideas. And just having the peace and quiet of being out in the wilderness, no cell phone, no distractions, internet, nothing. Just having the peace and quiet of nature. There's a lot of sounds and subtle sounds that that you don't normally pay attention to. The sound of the wind and sound of birds and chirping and insects, and normally you're so busy with all the major tasks that you have to do that you sort of miss out on all the ambiance. And it's just so serene up in the mountains. Just taking a nap in the sun in the mountains, or just jotting down my thoughts in my sketchbook. That was really kind of my fondest memory, because it was just relaxing, and that was a really good year.
May I add to that?
Yeah.
In civilization, it looks all the buildings, from an economic standpoint, are like cracker boxes. They're rectangular and they're harsh to look at. And when you're out in nature, you have rolling hills, winding streams, trees with irregular features and so on. Even the rocks, no rock looks like a soccer ball. Everything is kind of irregular. And it's soothing to the eye just to be out in the wilderness, and the clouds are irregular shapes. And yet in big cities, everything is, it's kind of boxy and angular. So it's very soothing to be out in the wilderness. And as we said before, it's a wonderful learning experience for the kids to be out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is pretty good. I had a great talk. I'm sorry that Zoom has been giving us a little bit of trouble today, but I'll fix all that in the I'll splice it together in editing. But if people like this format of video, Dad and I talk for like at least an hour every night anyway, so we're already talking about this kind of stuff, and I think it's a good idea that we're recording it. I think a lot of people might be interested in this kind of stuff, or if nothing else, the family might be interested. But if you like this video, share it with your friends, share it with your family. Subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what kind of stuff. If you have any questions, and maybe we can make some follow-up videos, get some sort of interaction. I've thought about either using the comments in YouTube or putting up some sort of website, trying to make a little bit more interactivity. I've thought about doing live streaming with this, but you can't edit out technical problems in a live stream. I haven't quite figured out the best way. I think probably these pre-recorded videos are the best. So share the video, and if you have any questions, let us know, and maybe we'll figure out what we're going to talk about next time. So, Dad, do you have anything you want to say before we sign out?
That'll do it. It's been a nice evening.
All right, so this has been Conversations with Dad. I thank you for watching, and good night.